Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Austin Davidson.
Heyo.
It's Season 3, Episode 23. It is Monday, July 23rd. We are just 2 days away from the Pittsburgh Steelers training camp getting underway. The players report by 4 p.m. on Wednesday. The first practice of the training camp session, the first training camp session begins at 2:55 on Thursday, the 26th. Austin, we made it through the offseason. It's finally over. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good because it's been terrible. It's only been baseball on.
Yeah, I don't know. This particular offseason felt really slow to me after the draft. Maybe that was because I feel like we went like about, I think, a combined month and a half between episodes at one point, between a couple of them. There really just was not much to talk about. I mean, last year I felt like there was more to talk about with the Lev Bell contract talks because it was new to us at the time, but this year we kind of knew it was going to happen, didn't we?
Yeah, it was more expected.
Well, with that being the case, we already covered the very beginning of the Steelers training camp schedule. Their first preseason game is against the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia on August 9th, which is actually just 2 weeks away from this upcoming Thursday. So it'll be here before you know it, and I know the preseason isn't exactly the best football that's going to be seen, but I think we can all agree that the preseason is actually kind of okay just because it's good to see football, right?
Yeah, it's better than nothing.
I mean, and at the very least, it's good to fine-tune your game, not just for the players, but for the coaches and the officials, and it gives you maybe a good chance to look at some players that maybe you wouldn't expect to see otherwise. I mean, who could forget Mike Hilton from last year coming out of nowhere to become the starting slot cornerback? So there's definitely a lot to be excited about, but just a couple things before we get to that. Steelers first-round pick safety Terrell Edmunds is still unsigned. I don't think there's anything to be worried about here. If there was, we probably would have heard a lot more about it, but when do you expect that to get done?
I'm actually thinking that it happens on the 25th. I think it happens the day that training camp opens. I think it's just 2 more days. I really can't imagine it being much longer. There's no word of a holdout or anything, so I think it happens 2 days from when we're recording this, probably a day from when this goes up.
If you heard what Edmunds has said about it, it seems like he doesn't seem to think it's an issue, so I would be shocked if this continues any further beyond, Wednesday or Thursday. So I think it's something that will be a non-issue relatively soon. Next point to talk about is that free agent wide receiver Eli Rogers has visited with several teams this weekend, and that has continued into this week. Rogers just met with the Kansas City Chiefs today and reportedly left without a deal in place. His next visit will be with the Cleveland Browns and Todd Haley. So I guess let's talk about Rodgers and the possibility of him signing with another team. It looked as though he was going to be coming back to Pittsburgh for sure, but now it's looking more and more like he won't be back. What does this mean for the receiving core if he does not come back?
I don't really think much. I think Marcus Tucker can do what he did last year, and despite him flashing some great things 2 years ago, Eli Rogers, coming off a bad season where he ended it with a major injury, I don't think the Steelers are missing out on much personally. His season was lackluster at best last season, so I'm not really losing sleep over it. I think Marcus Tucker could play that spot fine and do exactly what he did. But what do you think?
I'm just worried that if Eli Rogers isn't on the roster, it means Justin Hunter has a much better chance of being on the roster, and I can speak for both of us when I say that I don't want that. And I'm always in favor for having more depth. I think he's a more established player, and maybe it'll cost a little bit more to have him right now, but I can't imagine the Steelers would be breaking the bank and I'd just like to see him at least come back for training camp. But clearly, I was surprised when I heard that there were other teams interested in him, and I was pretty shocked to hear that he's been visiting so many different teams. Maybe it is out of the Steelers' hands at this point. I mean, I could understand that with there being 3 other receivers in front of him on the depth chart. But that being said, I'd still like to see him come back. All right, earlier this week, James Harrison was on Fox Sports 1 show Undisputed, and he was asked to compare Bill Belichick to Mike Tomlin. A fair question since he was a player for both coaches. Not many have been. Harrison stated what I think all of us would consider the obvious is that Bill Belichick is a better coach. But what's been causing some conversation is what he talked about regarding Mike Tomlin, and he cited, I should find the exact quote. I'll do that, but I know that he talked about a lack of discipline, that Mike Tomlin plays favorites, so I'll pull up the exact quote, but what did you think about what he said?
I mean, I think what some of this he said was true on at least some basis. I think that obviously Belichick is the better coach based on his win percentage and how many Super Bowls he has. But I think there is a possibility Harrison could be lying to get angry Steelers fans off his back and onto Mike Tomlin's. But I do believe that Harrison is mostly telling the truth, and I don't think he would just lie to lie. His comments are probably a bit exaggerated, though. There was definitely some salt backing his words, is what I'm trying to say. I think the favorites thing that he said that Mike Tomlin had favorites, is probably the exaggerated thing, and the undisciplined part is what's mostly true, if you ask me. I just think of the incident with Antonio Brown recording in the locker room when he was trying to give when Mike Tomlin was trying to give a speech for the next game, which was the AFC Championship game against the Patriots, and I that screams to me undisciplined. That screams to me like, why are you allowed to have your phone after you just won a playoff game and your coach is trying to give you a speech for the next game, get you pumped up for the next game? I don't know. That's what comes into my head. What do you think on the issue?
All right, so the exact quote after answering that Belichick was by far a better coach, he said, quote, Mike Tomlin is a good head coach. He's a player's coach. I think he needs to be a little more disciplined. The thing with Bill Belichick is he's very regimented. He's disciplined. Everyone is going to be on the same page. There's not going to be anything as far as someone doing their own thing. I think over there in New England, their whole coaching staff is like that. So I've been wrestling with this a bit because I'm kind of split down the middle on the issue. It's ironic that this is coming from Harrison because he was part of the leadership problem in Pittsburgh. I think that Tomlin does have a bit of a problem with discipline, but I think of something else more so to do with the coaches rather than the players. I think the leadership, when it comes to the governing the players, comes more so from the actual players themselves. And I don't mean that to say the coaches don't have any influence on that, but you hear Mike Tomlin constantly talking about setting the standard. And one thing that always bothered me, even though I really liked him as a player, it's that, remember when Joey Porter allegedly assaulted somebody at a bar after the Steelers playoff win over the Dolphins a couple years ago? You remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that.
I felt like he should have been fired after that. And he wasn't, and I felt like, I'm not saying that that was made okay by Tomlin, but I felt like there should have been something else, some sort of discipline handed down, and there was nothing at all. So I think that was a mistake, and when you're setting that standard by governing your coaching staff that way, I think it could be a problem that could trickle down to the players. As far as the playing favorites go, I'm a little more inclined to believe that. Because I remember a few years ago, it seemed like every time Antonio Brown scored a touchdown, there would be an excessive celebration penalty, and he would say in the postgame that won't happen again, and then the very next week it would happen again. So I feel like certain players can get away with more than other players. I mean, let me ask you, do you really think since, say, I don't know, 2013, that Antonio Brown, Ben Roethlisberger, and I guess even more recent, say the last 2 years, was there ever a point that you think Ben Roethlisberger, Lev Bell, or Antonio Brown were running to meetings because they were afraid to be late. Because that's apparently what James Harrison said. Tom Brady, he said, I saw Brady running to a meeting because he was worried he was going to be late. Do you think that the Steelers trio has ever done that in the past 3 years?
Probably not, no.
So I think that there is something to be said for that. So I don't know. I think he has some good points, but I also think he's just trying to poke and prod at the Steelers because he wasn't happy last year and he really did not behave properly when it came to him and the Steelers' messy divorce last year. So I'm inclined to believe him at least partially, but at the same time, I'm not going to take it too seriously. It was an interesting topic, though, for sure. All right, Austin, with training camp right around the corner, let's talk about some things we're going to be looking out for as the season gets underway. So I guess there are several big talking points to get to, but I think the most important one is how is the quarterback going to play? Ben Roethlisberger had a very slow start in 2017. He only threw 10 touchdowns to 9 interceptions in the first 8 games. He turned it around after the bye week, but I don't know. I don't think that we should expect him to start out poorly like he did in 2017. Do we think he'll play well? Do we think he'll play his best ever because of the extra motivation from Mason Rudolph being drafted? What do we expect? I think it's pretty clear the Steelers can't afford another slow start, but what's fair to expect from him this season?
I think he should be fine this season in terms of this play. I think he might even play with someone lit a fire under his butt at the Steelers drafted Mason Rudolph, as you said. And obviously they came out and said that they graded him like a first-round pick, so that's probably going to give him some motivation to play really hard this year. Not that he needs more, but with that being said, I don't expect another slow start at all. In fact, I think this may be one of his best years ever, as he's the best supporting cast on offense I think he's ever had. I feel like we've been saying this the past 3 years in a row, but still, this one I truly do believe is going to be the best that he has in his career. He has a full offensive line where the weakest link may be a B- player at the least. He has an all-pro running back, an all-pro wide receiver, and the greatest in the game right now. Then he's got 2 other promising wide receivers in Juju and rookie James Washington. So this should be a great season for him with all those pieces. So what do you think about how we've been playing this season?
I feel pretty confident about it, and I think I'm going to take a bit of a different perspective on it, and I'm just going to talk about the fact that last year's slow start shouldn't have been as surprising as it probably was. I mean, you think about last year, outside of Antonio Brown, who was a normal target for him? I mean, Bell was a target, but he's not the primary target. Martavis Bryant was gone for the season. Eli Rogers was struggling. Vance McDonald was a brand new tight end that was acquired via trade right before the season started. And you had a backup tight end in Jesse James who was playing the majority of the snaps. When you have that much of a shakeup at the receiver position and tight end position, I don't think it should be as surprising. And obviously the rookie Juju Smith-Schuster, I don't think it should be that surprising that he had a pretty slow start. Maybe not as bad as it was like in the Jacksonville game, but he clearly was not as comfortable with his receivers at the start of the season. This year, with the extra year under his belt in the offense, I think Vance McDonald is going to be better. Obviously, Brown is there. Smith-Schuster will be there, though there will be one rookie in James Washington. But it's mostly the same returning cast. And the other thing you have to look at, the Steelers' bye week is in Week 7. They play 6 games before that. Of those 6 teams that they play, only 2 of them were top 10 defenses in passing yardage last year. So it stands to reason that Roethlisberger should have a relatively easy time throwing the ball against most of the Steelers' early opponents, the only exceptions being the Ravens and Bengals, who the Steelers are probably a lot better than anyways and should win in the first place. Again, should. But I don't expect him to have a slow start in 2018 like he did in 2017 is what I'm really getting at. All right, second point is we've been talking about this ever since the Steelers drafted Terrell Edmunds, and didn't address the inside linebacker position in the draft. It looks as though the Steelers are going to deploy a different safety look, and they also don't seem to have a regular starting free safety. So I guess who is going to be the starting strong safety? Who's going to be the free safety? What do you want to see? Is there going to be three safeties a lot? What are we expecting to see here?
Well, I can say with full honesty, I don't really know. I'm thinking they're going to have a lot of plays where they have three safeties on the field with one playing as a linebacker or something, but this is really all just speculation at this point until we see some in action, whether it be the preseason or actual game. But after addressing safety and not inside linebacker in the draft, I sure hope they at least give it a try with multiple safeties on the field. I still think Burnett and Davis are the starters with Terrell Edmonds and Nat Burr backing them up, but Terrell Edmonds does have a chance to beat out Davis at some point in the year. If Davis performs like last year, it's almost a shoo-in that Terrell Edmonds will win it because Davis was really bad last year. But as for the actual positions, I want Sean Davis to play free safety and Morgan Burnett to be the strong safety, but I think the Steelers, from reports, are doing the opposite. But we'll see. Again, more speculation than anything. We'll see what actually happens when the Steelers employ it themselves. What do you think about the safety carousel that's going on right now? What do you think is going to end up as the starters and stuff?
I actually think this is the most interesting thing to monitor this preseason. It's actually, from what I've seen, it's Sean Davis that's most likely going to be getting the first crack at free safety. There have been reports that Morgan Burnett was going to be the free safety at the start, but it sounds more and more like they're wanting to keep him at strong safety where he's played most of his career. And if there's a linebacker-safety hybrid, it's going to be Terrell Edmonds in certain packages. But let's be honest, Sean Davis there's a good chance he's not going to work out there. So Burnett could end up there. Cam Sutton has been talked about going there, and even Edmonds could end up out there. Like I said before, the Steelers don't seem to have a natural free safety on the roster, so expect all of them to get a shot at it at some point in training camp. Hopefully some, if not all of them, can have a positive impact there. I have to think the lack of addressing the inside linebacker position in the draft means that they're going to have three safeties as part of a more non-traditional based defense. And while I think that could help the pass defense with extra athleticism, I'm worried about the Steelers using that on early downs and the other team just deciding to run the ball anyways, especially when you play a team like the Jaguars, which is unique, obviously, but you're talking about a bad situation if you're lining up with three safeties and only three linebackers and three defensive linemen when you've got a team lining up with two tight ends and running the ball. So that's something to be concerned about for sure. And if you're ending up in a lot of second and short situations, that kind of defeats the purpose of having those safeties on the field anyways. So that will definitely be something to keep an eye on. And I guess something else, let's kind of shine the spotlight on some players that need to turn it around. We both picked 5 different players that need to have big seasons, or 5 players that are going to determine whether or not the Steelers get over the hump this year, not the traditional players that you might think. So I guess, Austin, let's start with one of your players, and there was one player that we had together, so we can talk about him a little bit. We'll talk about that player last, but start with your first player.
My first player is actually Jordan Berry. It's mostly for his job's sake. Berry has been one of the worst in the league the past couple of seasons, and it's time for him to step up and give this team the special teams advantage they need. He's going to need to have a big season, otherwise he's going to end up cut after this year. Mark my words. If he has another bad year like he's had the past 2 years, which I was already done with him after this past year. I thought it was time to just take a punter in the 7th round or get an undrafted free agent one and just have someone beat out Berry. But that's my opinion. So the Steelers are banking on him having a good year. So I'm also going to say that he needs to have a big year because the Steelers are sticking with him. And he's not been good. So he needs to have a big season for the Steelers. So who's your first guy that needs to have a big season?
My first player is cornerback Joe Hayden. I thought about talking about Artie Burns, but I actually think that Hayden acted as the glue for the secondary last season. You think about it, everyone was talking about the Ryan Shazier injury for good reason, but another crucial injury was one that Joe Hayden suffered against the Colts last season. even when he came back, he wasn't at the top of his game. And I think that if Hayden can improve on last season, he's got a full year to train, get to know the playbook and defense a little better, and get healthy, I think it'll really help the defense. And a year where the secondary needs to step up, I think his contribution will be huge. What's your second player that you're shining the spotlight on?
The second player is Morgan Burnett. Burnett was brought in to be a safe tackler that the Steelers really needed. It's not really that he needs to have a big year, but more so that he needs to keep up his repertoire of consistently making tackles, a.k.a. do the job the Steelers hired him to do. That's really it. Because, hold on one second. My bad. I was about to spoil my next guy, but I'm going to save that. But basically, Burnett needs to make those tackles. He needs to be a guy that, he can't be like Mike Mitchell. He was brought in to basically replace Mike Mitchell, and he needs to make those tackles that when a player explodes through the middle of the defense, the safeties need to be there to be the safety, and that's Morgan Burnett here. So who's your second player that you're shining the light on?
I've got Alejandro Villanueva, the left tackle. Ben Roethlisberger was not the only player that had a sluggish start last year, and in 2 seasons as a starter, Villanueva has taken in both years about 3 to 5 games to really get going. Although I think he's generally an overrated player on the team, he's still a quality starter in the league and a dependable guy, especially when he's going well. The problem is his inconsistencies in the past, and if he can get a little more consistent, especially early on in the year, it should help the offense along, and we should see them reach those high-scoring numbers that we were expecting all of last season and didn't get until the second half. Who's your next player?
My next player is actually 2 players. It's really whoever's starting at inside linebacker, but I have Tyler Matakevich and John Bostic. Really much the same for these guys as it was for Burnett. Whichever one starts needs to have a big year and make the tackles. After Shazier went down, it was a mess down the middle. So whichever linebacker starts, they're going to have a solid year and make those tackles that the backup linebackers couldn't do. And this year, the Steelers can't get attacked with their depth. The Steelers still don't really have linebacker depth. So these guys, if they can't do it, there's no one after these guys. The Steelers would be again screwed, and I think that there would be calls for firings after this. I think there's going to be calls for firings from Keith Butler and stuff like that if the linebackers don't do anything. The inside linebackers can't stop the run and stuff. When the inside linebacker wasn't addressed in the draft, so. It's a big year for these guys because it's also going to be a big year for coaches if these guys can't do stuff. Also look for the linebacker coaches to be on blast after this year. But who is your third player you're looking at?
Mine is the wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster. He had an electric rookie season last year, but we've seen that the sophomore slump is all too real a thing. With injury concerns and OTAs and minicamp regarding his hamstring, I'm worried that he's going to have maybe a few setbacks this season. There's not a lot of reasons to believe he's going to flop, and I don't think that he will. But at the same time, you might be a little concerned about a hamstring injury possibly affecting him if he doesn't get that rested up and back to 100%. Again, there's not a whole lot of a reason to believe he's going to be bad, but he needs to play well next season because he'll be taking a lot of the pressure off of Antonio Brown. All right, what is your next player? Who is your next player?
My next player is Bud Dupree. And this is also for Bud Dupree's job's sake. He was on the border of getting his 5th-year option picked up. It was debated whether it should even be picked up at all. But this year he needs to prove he could be a quality pass rusher and finally have his breakout year that we thought he was going to have for a while. It's just when Bud Dupree came back 3 years ago, I'm sorry, it looked like he was actually going to be that linebacker, that first-round linebacker the Steelers got as a steal, that Bud Dupree wasn't supposed to fall that far. And it fizzled out. And we haven't really seen Bud Dupree break out. He went back into his shell, and we've been waiting for another breakout. He's got the speed for it. It's just, he needs to have a big year this year so he could get paid, so he could go and maybe go to another team. Who knows? Well, it just really depends on how he does for a lot of things. Who is your next player?
My next is Stephon Tuitt, and from a raw pass rushing standpoint, he was actually a better pass rusher than Cameron Hayward was last season. That is, until it came to actually bringing the quarterback down. Tuitt struggled to finish sacks last season and needs to get more consistent pressure while being a little bit better against the run. He was injured almost all of last season from like the second play of the year, and that certainly was a reason for his inconsistent play, but he's got to step up this year, and he knows it too. If the Steelers want to become a great defensive unit again, it's going to start with Tuitt turning it around from his disappointing 2017. All right, Austin, the one player that we both had, as our fifth player was Sean Davis. So I guess, why do you think that Davis is someone that's crucial to the Steelers' success or failure this season?
Well, last year there was a mess at the safety position. There's no denying it, and Sean Davis was a part of that mess. He was the starter, obviously, alongside Mike Mitchell. And in that year, he regressed, and he just needs to bounce back in the season. At least the way he played as a rookie, which is funny to say. Usually you want a player to improve better than when they were in their rookie year, but Davis isn't that way. If he plays the same way he did last year, he's going to end up as a backup by the end of the year. There's just no around it. I just remember at the Ravens game that we went to, it was frustrating watching him. I remember even getting mad that he got an interception. Like, oh, thank God he finally did something. Like, we couldn't even be happy because he was just having such a terrible game. It's just, he is key to the Steelers' success this year because he's still going to be the starting safety even after this terrible year that probably knocks him down a few notches on the Steelers' depth. They didn't literally knock him off the depth chart, but the Steelers are probably really considering and testing out Terrell Edmonds and seeing how he could play if he were put in that spot because of how bad Sean Davis did last year. So this is really a big year for him to see if he's going to end up as a backup for the rest of his tenure with the Steelers, or if he can actually return to his rookie form. Why do you have Sean Davis as a big a player to watch this season?
Well, let's be honest. Sean Davis, if he has a decent or a good season last year, they don't draft a safety, do they? At least not that early.
No, almost definitely not, no.
There's no denying, as you said, that Davis had a terrible 2017 season. He's going to need a good bounce-back season. Part of it's going to depend on where he's playing. If he is the free safety, it's going to be kind of unfortunate for him because that'll be his third position in as many years in the league. I don't have a ton of high hopes for him playing the free safety position because he never played that position on the college or pros. I do understand the necessity, but I think the best thing to do for him right now is to put him in a spot and just leave him there. And he's seemingly getting frustrated about it, and it would really be a shame if he continues to regress, considering he was the Rookie of the Year for the Steelers in 2016. I still think there's ability there. He's never been a jump-out-at-you Troy Polamalu kind of safety, but in his rookie year, he was a more reliable guy, a more sure-handed tackler, a good run support guy who could occasionally have some nice plays in the passing game. I think another thing that needs to be considered is his mental state. Like, if he's getting frustrated, the Steelers have to be able to, well, I guess they don't have to, but they should at least be aware that the mental aspect could be frustrating him too. He could be getting frustrated and down on himself because obviously it was a tough year. So I think if Davis plays well this year, depending on whether he's at strong or free, that will be big for the Steelers' defense. We already talked about how they give up a ton of huge plays last year. Even if he makes those tackles or is better at making those tackles than Mike Mitchell was, or he gets there a little bit faster because he's not as hobbled or as slow from the injuries and age, it should help the defense. Look, giving up a 50-yard pass play is bad, but giving up a 75-yard touchdown pass after you've missed the tackle on the 50-yard pass is far worse. If he can make those plays that Mike Mitchell didn't make, I'm not going to say it was a great year, but that could be the difference in some of those big games where Davis really struggled last year. So I think that Davis's play this year is going to be incredibly important this year. All right, next topic. Let's talk a little bit about Lev Bell. In order for him to secure his $14.5 million price tag that he apparently wants at minimum, with at least 50% of the contract guaranteed from any team, what's he going to have to do? this year?
Well, for starters, he's going to have to get up to above the average yards per carry for running backs, which was 4.2 this past season. So he's going to have to get at least 4.3 yards per carry in that regard. As for his catches, I think he's pretty good where he's at. I think he could even get away with only 78 to 80. He got 85 last year and be fine as well. I think that the catches aren't really as important as the rushing. As for touchdowns, I think he's going to have to secure at least 10 total, both on the ground and through the air. And then finally, I think he'd have at most 3 fumbles. And the most important thing out of all of this is he can't suffer any injuries or get suspended. Otherwise, there's no way he's going to get the guarantees he wants. He could get injured and still get $14.5 million, but he's not getting the guarantees if he gets injured. Like, it's just not happening. If a team sees that, they're going to be like, well, he's basically already done. He's already suffered 3 injuries now. He's done. So he's got to be careful this year. He really does. What do you think is the minimum required out of Le'Veon Bell to get the deal he wants?
I agree with you from the standpoint of the injuries and suspensions. If he gets any of that, or if he even sits out a game to avoid getting injured, which I don't think he would do, but if he did, I think that would also signal a red flag to other teams. I honestly think, though, that the stats aren't as big of a deal as long as there's not a huge drop-off. If he's still got 1,200 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns, 65 catches for 500 yards or so, even if its yards per carry isn't a great number, as long as it's above a number like 3.8 or something, I still think that there's going to be a team out there that has a ton of cap space that's going to be willing to spend a lot of money to bring in a star like Bell. And I'd be shocked if a team gave him more than $15 million, but I can understand why he was betting on himself, but I still think I'd be surprised if anyone pays that much more than what the Steelers were offering to pay him this year. So I guess at the end of the day, Bell has a lot to lose and not much to gain, if I'm being honest. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I basically see that he's got a lot to lose. I'm sorry, I messed that up. Yes, I agree.
All right. But we will see, and we probably won't see him for a while, though. On to NFL news. Not a whole lot to talk about. The Patriots are looking to trade wide receiver Malcolm Mitchell. No idea who he could be traded to or why they would be trading him, considering their wide receiving core in the first 4 games is going to be very weak without Julian Edelman, but time will tell. You have any thoughts on that?
I just think it's stupid. I think Malcolm Mitchell is one of their most promising wide receivers after Julian Edelman. I feel like he could be the slot guy, the number 3 guy after Chris Hogan. I guess they're betting on Jordan Matthews because Jordan Matthews is decent. He just gets injured a lot. But I don't know. I don't like Cordarrelle Patterson. I think Kenny Britt is way too old and shouldn't be moved on from, especially when Malcolm Mitchell is so young. I don't know. I'm not a fan of them trying to trade it. But, I guess if that's what they want to do, if they want to make themselves even worse at the wide receiver position, they could go for it.
And last but not least, some sad news to report from Minnesota. Offensive line coach Tony Sparano has died at the age of 56. The former head coach of the Miami Dolphins and Oakland Raiders died on Sunday. He was just 56 years old. We learned today that Sparano was suffering from a heart disease, and it was he had gone to the hospital last week, but had since been checked out and returned home. So obviously very sad, and a stunned family and a stunned football team and fans. We all send our condolences to the Sparano family and the Minnesota Vikings. Very sad. Tony Sparano, dead at the age of 56. You might remember him as the coach of the Miami Dolphins, leading a turnaround from a 1-15 team to an 11-5 AFC West champion team in 2008, led by Chad Pennington. The only team to win the AFC East besides the Patriots since, I believe, 2002. Quite an accomplishment there, and he was also well known for reintroducing the Wildcat to the NFL. It was a short-lived fad in the NFL, but the Wildcat offense with Ronnie Brown and Ricky Williams made its impact in the NFL when he was coaching the Dolphins. So just wanted to take a moment to recognize him. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Nah, it's just crazy. He's so young. I mean, it's 58. It's not a time you'd expect someone to be passing on. It's just way too early, man.
Absolutely, but very sad, and our condolences go out to him, his family. I guess on that sad note, I think we're ready to wrap things up. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we finish today?
Nope, I think we're good.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, thank you as always for joining us today on the Stronger Than Steel podcast. If you have any questions about the show or about the Steelers in general you want to ask us, email us at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. Check out our website, strongerthansteelnfl.blogspot.com. You can also see our various links on the website to our various social media platforms, including Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you check out our YouTube page, I've been posting video every day of Steelers highlights from the 2005 championship season. Just posted the Steelers' 34-21 win over the Cleveland Browns on Sunday Night Football in week, I believe, 10. So be sure to check that out. And if you want to enjoy some of the great memories from that season, be sure to check it out. So Austin, thank you again for joining me tonight, and we finally got through the offseason. It's a cause for celebration.
Yeah, boy. Football's almost back.
Alrighty. Thank you, as always, for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast.
Have a good night.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.